But thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Best-selling author Joseph Finder will discuss his new thriller, The Oligarch Starter, in conversation with best-selling author Lisa Gardner in this installment of Author Hour in Massachusetts. So first of all, these folks need no introduction, but I'll do it anyway. So Lisa Gardner is the #1 New York Times best-selling author of over 24 thrillers published across 30 countries. Her novel, The Neighbor, won Best Hardcover Novel from the International Thriller Writers. Her latest release is Still See You Everywhere, where tropical paradise meets murder and mayhem. When not researching how to commit the perfect crime, Lisa enjoys hiking, gardening, and traveling the world. And Joseph Finder is the New York Times bestselling author of 16 suspense novels, including House on Fire, The Fixer, and Suspicion. 2 of his novels have been adapted into major motion pictures, Paranoia, starring Harrison Ford and Gary Oldman, and High Crimes, starring Ashley Judd and Morgan Freeman. 4 more have won the industry's top best novel awards. Killer Instinct won the International Thriller Writers Award. Buried Secrets won the Strand Critics Award. Guilty Minds won the Barry Award. And Company Man also won the Barry Award. And what makes this especially exciting tonight is Joseph is joining us live from Boston, Massachusetts, where he lives. So everyone who's watching live and the many more that will watch the recording, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Joseph and Lisa for joining us here tonight. And Lisa, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Robert. And Joe, it's such an excitement to be here.
Great to see you, Lisa. Lisa, where have you been? Where have you been?
Oh, I just came back from Panama, but I am now in up in New Hampshire, which Joe and I will be discussing because it's relevant to the Oligarch's Daughter. And as all of you will quickly become aware of, Joe and I possibly, go back a few years. We might know each other or know each other's work well, and this is going to be a particularly fun and delightful hour for all of you, particularly because I'm also a huge, huge fan of Joe and your work. And I was kind of thinking the first time, and I didn't really know you, Joe, I'm going to confess, but we were both members of the International Thriller Writers. And I was sitting in New York at Thriller Fest, which if you are an aspiring writer or a fan of thrillers, you should attend some year. And the winner of the best thriller of the year was Joe's Killer Instinct. And I'm like, who is this Joe? What is this book? Because I'm sure whatever I wrote was better. But no, I had to go and I read Killer Instinct, and I'm not going to lie, to this day, one of my all-time favorite novels.
Right.
So tell us a little, Joe. How'd you get going in Killer Instinct? Because wow, I mean, you've written some absolutely amazing novels.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I've written, Oligarch is number 17.
Yeah.
But that does not compare to how many you've written, I don't think, right?
I stopped counting a while ago, but 30-something.
30-something, okay. Yeah, so I've been doing this a long time, and
yeah.
Oligarch's Daughter actually took me 2 years, which is unusual, because normally I write a book within a year. And this one, with just the research in New Hampshire and the research with Russia and all that kind of thing, just took more time. So,
well, it's interesting to me because your very first thriller and Oligarch's Daughter, it's kind of a bookend. It's, From Russia with Love.
Yeah.
This is a particular area, subject matter, and expertise that is very unique to you and your background. If you could talk about that a bit more.
Yes. My first novel was called The Moscow Club, and it was sort of a post-Cold War novel, and it came out in 1991, and I had been studying Russian and Russian studies in college and then a couple of years in graduate school. And I knew I did not want to be an academic, and I knew I didn't want to be a spy. I decided I wanted to be a writer. And I said, what do you know? The one thing you know is Russia. So write a book about Russia to some extent. It's an American CIA guy who's involved
Yeah.
with Russia. But so that was my first one. And what's interesting is that um, I wrote about Russia a little bit in my second book, but then I stopped. I sort of felt like, it was the 1990s and people couldn't figure out what to make of Russia.
Yeah.
Was Russia an ally or a friend or an enemy? What was the deal? And people didn't really seem to want to read novels set there. So I just moved on and
Yeah.
did novels that you might call more domestic suspense or different kinds of books. Some corporate intrigue.
Yeah.
And but it wasn't until just a couple of years ago that I sort of thought, who's a really good bad guy is Putin. He's a
Yeah.
really good bad guy,
Well said. Yeah.
right? And I sort of decided I wanted to write a novel that sort of dealt with Russia in a different way, not just like Russia is the enemy, Russia is the bad guy, but I wanted us to sort of get an appreciation for Russian culture and literature and the people. And this is what happens in The Oligarch's Daughter, where our hero, Paul Brightman, falls in love with the daughter of a Russian oligarch. And he also falls in love with her family.
Yeah.
It's a very kind of warm, inviting family. Um, Arkady, her father, the oligarch, is a very jovial, family-centered guy, very loving, but also kind of sinister at the same time.
Mhm.
Wanted us to not be sure what to make of Arkady. So that's sort of what propelled me into writing about Russia for the Oligarch's Daughter.
Yeah, the thing that struck me when I was reading The Oligarch's Daughter, because I'm both familiar with your work and the whole Russian issue, is you took something that at the beginning of your career, I feel it was much more sensitive to like current events. And people would have said you were like an international thriller novelist, which is kind of a code for you're a spy novelist.
Right.
But you took that culture and you took things you know particularly well. But The Oligarch's Daughter isn't really about international intrigue as much as it's about family.
Yeah.
You made it a domestic suspense
Yeah.
where you have our new young erstwhile groom who we all adore, who falls in love with and gets part of this world that at one hand is glitzy and glamorous. I mean, there's shades of The Oligarch's Daughter that reminds me of basically The Godfather, or
Yeah.
someone walking into that culture. Did that influence your work, or how was that for you?
Yeah. I sort of thought of this book as being half a chase novel and half a love story.
Yeah,
And
that seems perfect.
I wanted us to sort of be with Paul as he meets this woman, finds her really interesting. They start going out on dates. Eventually they fall in love, and he just doesn't know who she is really. He doesn't know that she's the daughter of a Russian oligarch. I wanted to sort of bring in that domestic stuff, which I find actually more interesting than the plain old international intrigue, which has been done a lot, you know?
Yeah.
So it's, what's interesting is that I started working on this book actually before the war in Ukraine broke out.
Mm.
And I sort of had this idea of writing about an oligarch, one of these Russian billionaires who's a merchant prince in a sense, and he owns a huge mansion in New York, several houses around the world, yachts, private jets, and he's sort of unbelievably wealthy. And I wanted us to sort of get a sense of him as a person, and not just as a concept, not just as a
Yeah.
concept. So, and I thought the best way to do this was through an American character. our hero, Paul Brightman. And uh, while I was writing the book, the Russians invaded Ukraine, and all of a sudden the oligarchs were persona non grata. They were all sanctioned. They kind of went scuttling back to Russia. We seized their yachts. And I thought, oh man, that's the end of this book. I can't write it anymore. And until I realized, actually, if I did two timelines, one 6 years ago and one today, this could make the book even more interesting. So that was my decision to sort of split it up into two timelines.
And I love that because you get I just love Paul as a character. He's us, right? He's
Yeah.
the everyday person who just, he's brilliant at what he does. He's Wall Street. He's got this gift for trading, but he really genuinely meets a woman and he falls in love.
Yeah.
And that to me is the heart of this novel. I mean, you could put it under international intrigue and high finance and so many things, but it's really a book about a young guy who falls in love.
Right. That's right.
And then, for all the rest of us, when you fall in love, there's this moment of meeting the in-laws and you hope they'll like you. And then in Paul's case, there's a moment of, wait, what?
Yeah.
Oh, the in-laws.
Yeah. Yeah.
This becomes like really real, really fast.
Yeah. He doesn't know anything about the family. He knows that her parents live in New York or have a house in New York or something. He doesn't know. And then he goes one night to meet them for the first time. And it is this two townhouses put together in Manhattan on the Upper East Side. And he goes, this is where they live? Oh my God.
Yeah.
He goes in there and everything is gold and there's a swimming pool and it's sort of amazing. And he turns to Tatiana, his girlfriend at the time, and says, why didn't you tell me about this? And her response is, because I thought you basically would leave me if you knew.
Yeah.
And so there was this kind of revelation about her background. The thing about Tatiana is she does not want to be known as the daughter of a Russian oligarch.
Yes.
She wants to live a regular life in New York. She's a photographer. She's an artist. She lives in a sort of crappy apartment in Manhattan.
Yes, I love that. The details of what he knew of her and then like what? Like
Yeah, she's kept all that from him and from her friends. She wants to not, and that's sort of based on some people that I know, very rich kids who don't want to live rich.
Yeah.
And I thought of that as an interesting way into the world of the Arkady Galkin family.
I love this juxtaposition where on the one hand, I mean, you clearly know Russia extremely well. I mean, both from your education, your first book, you've gone to Russia, you've done research. I think you have some good stories on that front as well.
Mhm.
But the heart of the oligarch's daughter is really a romance in many ways.
Mhm.
It's a young man meets a beautiful girl, and she's not all she's pretending to be, or she's pretending to be someone she's not completely, but the person maybe she wants to be.
Yeah.
And Paul is, trying to like level up. He's
Yeah.
trying to actually pretend to be more sophisticated, and she's trying to pretend to be less sophisticated.
Yeah.
And these are things that are so incredibly human. And what they recognize in each other is they click.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it's kind of like, and then reality hits.
Yeah. Yeah, they're in a sense different personality types.
Yeah.
She's sort of more spontaneous. He's sort of more of a planner.
Yeah.
And they really complement each other in the classic way that people fall in love. And he doesn't at first get who she is totally.
Yeah.
It takes him a while to sort of figure out who she is, because she loves wearing good clothes, right? but
But kind of slummy looking good clothes. The really
right,
expensive, like not expensive looking clothes kind of
right,
thing.
right, right, right. Just careful about that. And she's got a stepmother who is sort of competitive with her. Um,
I have
always
to admit, as a female, I love that whole vibe. I'm like, you nailed that very well. She's basically competing with her stepmom
right,
for appearance, acknowledgement, father's attention. Like, that's
right.
definitely a dynamic. I don't think any woman reading this novel is not going to be like, oh, yeah, yeah,
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted it to feel as real as possible. And you know what's interesting is this is the first time I've really done a romance in one of my books. Uh, and and I gave it to a number of female readers to make sure it read plausibly, and it worked on that a lot. But I wanted this to grab you most of all when you're reading the book. Not just because I know the intrigue stuff I know.
Yeah, it's natural to you.
Yeah. But this I wanted to grab the reader most of all, that the heart, as you put it, the heart of the book.
So what came to you first? Because you're known for your intrigue, your plots, your suspense. But again, this book really is domestic suspense with this
Yeah.
huge kind of international and almost like cultural overlay. Like it's not just boy meets girl. Boy meets girl, and girl's family is actually, homicidally dangerous and quite threatening
Yeah.
and a definite unknown. I mean,
Right.
so when you first even approached this project, what was it that came to you first?
Well, interestingly, the first thing that came to me, I had this image of a guy living in a small town in New Hampshire,
I like you already.
and but he's living under an alias,
Mhm.
and he's hiding out from somebody and under a false identity. And so I said, all right, is that even possible anymore in today's
Yeah,
world
really.
with facial recognition and closed circuit TV cameras and Google and LinkedIn and all of that? Is it possible even? And so I talked to a number of experts on disappearing.
Mm.
Turned out that the standard way in the old days, in old thrillers, for example, the way you would disappear would be to go into the anonymity of a big city.
Oh,
But that doesn't work anymore because there are
it doesn't work anymore. Yeah.
too many cameras. So basically,
Yeah.
you disappear into the anonymity of a small town that doesn't have all these kinds of cameras.
Hmm.
And I also learned that the worst way to disappear is to fake your own death.
Oh, this is fun. How come?
Yeah, because if you do that, you will have, and you try to create a homicide, you will have the police investigating and investigating until they
Okay,
track
yeah.
it down. And so if you want to avoid that kind of investigation on the part of the police, you just walk out the door one day and don't come back. And what's important is that you deal only in cash, because if
Yeah.
you start generating interest, the IRS will track you down. So you've got to. So I created the character. Paul changes his name; it's a different identity. Lives in New Hampshire. He's a boat builder, and he deals only in cash. Some customers don't want to pay only in cash. He doesn't deal with them.
Yeah,
He's
exactly.
just getting by, and he is able for 5 years to escape some bad guys.
And
And
I love that as an opening, actually, because you get that sense of, okay, we already know this guy isn't who he says he is, but we kind of
yeah,
like him. And we kind of get the sense of clearly from the very beginning of the book, you understand this is a calculated sacrifice.
right.
Like, he could be doing better, he could be doing more, he could have more customers, he could be growing his business, but really the math in the back of his head for reasons we don't know yet. We don't know what the equation is I'm way better off making way less money and staying invisible
Yeah.
than fulfilling my potential and having people know who I am. So I
Yeah.
love that because right out of the gate, that establishes for you, the reader, oh, whoever this guy is, it's very, very dangerous.
Right. So I started with this idea of, can you disappear in today's world?
Yeah.
Then I thought to myself, so why is he running? Who's he
Yeah.
from? What would be really scary? And um, then I began to create this backstory for him of the of that he's running from a Russian oligarch, very well connected. We don't know how well. And um, how does he come into the world of this oligarch? How does that happen? You know? So um, I began to sort of build this up so that finally I said, all right, my character has got to meet some Russian oligarch in some way that's plausible and attract the attention of the guy. So let's make my American character a finance guy who's really good at this. And the oligarch is attracted to him and wants to hire him and brings him into his family, his son-in-law, as it turns out. So the the love story part actually came later. I started with this disappearance idea and then backed into the idea of the oligarch and his daughter and Paul. And I thought this could be, if I have these two things going on, the book could be really gripping. So that's how I sort of backed into it in a sense.
And I have to say, when I was reading it, I had shades of watching the movie Wall Street from back in the day,
Mm-hmm.
where Paul is like preternaturally gifted.
Yep.
Like he's really, really good with the markets and seeing opportunities and reading and understanding strategies. But he actually isn't out of the gate, like, make profit or die, or I want to be the most. But as he gets sucked into this world of his girlfriend and her family, and I like it again, it's the kind of the domestic angle. And he's, who doesn't want to make their girlfriend's family proud of them, or kind of register if you're going to start going to all these parties where it's all the, the biggest shakers in the world. You kind of want to, you don't want to be the the hangdog on the girlfriend's arm. You want to be I can do this all too.
Right. Alpha male. Yeah.
Yeah. It sucks him into, he's got the brains for it.
Yeah.
But it's really becomes this kind of rabbit hole he ends up down with, the best of intentions. He's trying to be the big boyfriend. He's trying to make his girlfriend proud of him. He wants to impress the, potentially future in-laws, and all of a sudden one, a trade here, a trade there, a strategy here, a strategy there. And, he's in bed basically with the Russian mob.
Right. That's right.
That problem we all have, I'm sure, Did you blot that out, or how well could you see? Because it happens so organically and naturally. That's the kind of the joy of reading the book, is you fill yourself with Paul. You're, hey, oh, I'll do this little thing. And there's like, well, I'll do this other little thing, and I'll do this other. And then the next thing you know, oh yeah, you are down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure how you work. I don't know how much plotting you do, but my method is to set up the story first, plot maybe the first 20% of the book. And then I kind of let myself evolve, let the story evolve from there. I usually know where a story is going to end before I start it, but I let it flow after the early outline part of the book. And I think that's what makes it feel organic to the reader, because if you're writing and you surprise yourself, you're going to surprise the reader. Don't you find that?
Yeah, I think this is the thing you and I have in common, both to our consternations at times. We we learn as we go, which is to sometimes say we spend a lot of the writing process deeply frustrated.
Yeah.
Where we're supposed to go.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. You come up with the problem first, but
Hmm.
you don't already know the solution. Because if we already know the solution, the reader will already know the solution. The first
Right.
is to come up with a puzzle so big, the solution's not obvious even to us.
So I knew Robert Ludlum because we had the same agent. And Ludlum told me when I was starting out my career that what you've got to do is you've got to outline the whole thing, the whole book, and he would do outlines of 150 single space type
God,
unbelievable
yikes.
outlines. And he said, try it.
Yeah,
So I tried it with one book, and by the time I was done with the outline, I didn't want to write the book. I was done.
yeah.
I was done with it. It was no longer interesting to me. So the part that you and I struggle with is sort of figuring out how to solve the solution, how to solve the problem, is also the part that, if you do it right, feels organic and interesting to the
Yeah.
reader.
I love it when readers tell me they never saw the ending coming because I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
neither did I. I mean, it was a
Yeah.
surprise to both of us. And I feel like kind of what you're saying, if I've already written a 150-page outline, so now what I'm doing for the next year is just getting up and like filling in the blanks.
Yeah.
What a boring job.
It's boring. It's like factory work or something like
It's
that.
so much more interesting, like you said, create a really compelling puzzle,
Yeah.
throw some really great characters at it, and then we show up each morning to
Yeah.
see what will happen next.
Yeah. How to solve it.
So,
Exactly. And
which
that's,
brings me to then one of my favorite parts about the Oligarch's daughter. So, Joe and I know each other from Boston, and I lived in Boston for years, but now I am up in the White Mountains of New Hampshire for people who are local to England. And my favorite part of Oligarch's daughter is there is quite the chase scene that Joe wrote that happens in my backyard of the White Mountains of New Hampshire. How did you come up with that? Because that was an amazing, epic, goes on for a long time, like surviving in the wilderness, how to be off grid, how to escape, and very, very well done.
you. Thank you so much. I knew once I figured out that Paul had to be living in New Hampshire in hiding.
Yeah, off grid. Yeah, there's one.
Then I
New
know
Hampshire's one of the places you can escape. Really.
right. Yeah. So once I figured that out, I knew there had to be a chase within New Hampshire, and the natural place to do it is the woods, the White Mountains.
Mhm.
And so he, well, what I did was I tracked down a couple of wilderness experts as guides, really, New Hampshire wilderness guides in Barrington, New Hampshire, um, who took me into the White Mountains on a really cold January day to teach me how my hero would survive in the woods. And they both said, well, he'd have a go bag. He'd have packed a go bag ready to go. I got that. And here's what he'd have in the bag. Okay. And I said, but I'm cold. How do you start a fire? You know? Because I said, please don't tell me you rub two sticks together because I know that doesn't work. So they said, no, 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 no. He'd have a flint and a knife. And I said, I had no idea how to do that. And they just showed me, you take this flint and a knife and you scrape the knife against it, and you generate sparks, and these big fat sparks go into the pile of wood shavings that you've collected, birch, and catch fire right away. And you've got a fire. And so one after another, they taught me how my guy would survive in the woods for several days while being chased by the Russian mob.
So you're just like hanging out in my backyard now with your flint and your knife, and you're ready to go. It's deep winter. Today was 5 degrees. You got this?
Yeah, so I didn't know how long I wanted him to try to be running in the woods, surviving.
Sure. Yeah.
The more I did it, the more I was interested in it, and the more I felt, you know how it is, the scenes just sort of built one on top of the other. I really wanted to write more and more scenes in the woods of New Hampshire.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you liked it. I mean, you're the wilderness expert out there. So
I
you
don't
know,
know about expert, but yeah, I like the woods and I like hiking and stuff. But it brings us to another aspect of Paul. When did you know who's the expertise and the background of Paul's father? Because that becomes very, again, at the end of the day, the Oligarch's Daughter is a book of relationships. The family you know, the family you're trying to marry into, the family you think you don't like, but then the family you start to appreciate that maybe really does love you, even if you don't always get it.
right. Yeah. Yeah. I wanted Paul to be estranged from his father. I wanted
Yeah,
Paul to come from a small, sort of desolate family. His
yeah,
mother died when he was young. He's estranged from his father, who's kind of half cracked, and he uh, um, he sees Tatiana's family as being warm and inviting,
yes,
and completely different, very
yeah.
inviting, very inviting. So, um, as the book went on, I thought more and more about Paul's father. And one of the things I wanted Paul to do is to be good at surviving in the woods as a survivalist. And um, so Paul is, um, how do I put this? I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry about that, Lisa.
You're talking about Paul and his father. And one of the things I thought a lot
Yeah,
about this book that I loved is I think in thriller writing, when you do it at your best, you're taking all these like over the top elements. Like
yeah,
most of us are not going to actually fall in love with a homicidal oligarch's daughter or whatnot. But the dynamics behind this, a young, impressionable, comes from a broken home. Well, yeah, broken home. I mean, a very mixed up family background himself,
yeah,
Paul.
yeah.
He's trying to make it in the world. He wants to be successful. He meets this young girl. They fall in love. And then her family, it's not just that they're over the top rich and successful, but clearly they are. But in a weird way, they almost become the epitome of what family should be.
Hmm.
So they become kind of almost the prize for Paul. And
Yeah.
yet, part of the course of the novel is him also realizing how much, appearances can be deceiving, right?
And how much he'd learned from his father, who he's,
Yeah, that in the end, his own messed up, broken.
yeah, that messed up relationship turns out to be useful in some ways.
Yeah.
And so Paul's father is he's sort of like the Unabomber, you know,
Yeah, yeah, he is. Yeah,
Top
that's a
bomb.
great example. Yeah.
He's sort of,
So Paul's
he
father,
hates,
the Unabomber, suddenly
right,
turns out to be,
right,
you know.
right. And he hates modern technology and society. And so he's, uh, he was a Vietnam vet, and he learned how to survive in the woods from his time in the army, and he taught Paul. And Paul resented that. Paul just wanted to have like a regular camping out experience with his father. And instead, the father is teaching him, you know, how to create hides in the wood, in the wood,
Yeah.
and how to evade. And he said,
Yeah.
"What do I need to evade for? I'm just a kid,
Yeah.
you know?" So, but it turns out that it's really useful to Paul, this background that his father Stanley has taught him. It helps him survive.
Yeah. And I love that positioning of, again, so many of us growing up are like, oh my God, really seriously, this is what we're doing. And then but as you get older, you start to appreciate the value
Yeah.
of what your family's trying to teach you, even if at the time you're like, oh, really seriously, this is what we're
Yeah.
how lame or embarrassing or whatnot. Or you and I are parents now. We've gotten to hear these things from our children. I mean, but we would like to believe in our own story, right? That our children 5 years from now will use our learnings for some kind of greater good and be like, oh, our parents were cool. we
it
didn't
turned out.
think people who made up stories for a living were cool, but
Right.
maybe it's relevant. Like I'm talking my way out of a, I don't know, kidnapping beats me, but we just want to believe somehow that we will be cool one day
Right.
in our children's stories.
Yeah, that will be relevant, will matter. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
And this to me is a fantasy element of fiction that, you know, there's some way.
Well, we make it up, so we make up stories for a living.
Yeah.
We do. Um,
And so what keeps you going in this career? Because you've had a long and well-storied and very, very successful career. But
Thank you, Lisa. Well, I love the privilege of being paid to make up stories for a living.
that's an excellent thing right there. Not gonna lie.
I think it's really cool. I love being able to do that. And I also love going out on the road and meeting my readers. Because you know how it is, we sit in a room alone with a book,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden, when it's time to sell the book, you go out there and you meet people who've actually read your book or read books that you've written. And it's very exciting, I find. So
Yeah.
yeah, those are the things that really keep me going, I think. How about you?
Yeah, so you're like me. We've both been at this like 30 years, right?
Yeah,
When
yeah.
you actually see a stranger, say on a plane or in a restaurant or whatever, actually reading one of your books, how freaky is that?
That has happened to me. Yep.
Yeah.
And I was on a book tour, and we were flying out of Boston, and I got into the plane, and there was this guy in the seat in front of me reading one of my books. And I said to myself, should I say something? Do I dare? And finally, I stuck my head between the seats and I said, so how's that book? And he goes, eh. And I said, well, you haven't gotten that far in, but it gets better, I promise. Learned my lesson.
Yeah, to this day, I'm convinced my mom has a warehouse with a lot of novels in it. That's still my working theory for my career. Isn't it kind of funny to be an author? Like we're still just can't believe other people like this stuff.
I
So
know. It's amazing and very exciting.
so before we go, particularly and go to other people's questions, when you first started out with your
Yeah.
first novel, The Moscow Club, which you were in Russia, right? I still remember you talking about this really kind of that research, the beginning of your career with Russia got a little scary. You had to leave kind of very quickly and under the gun, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. I at one point tracked down an old KGB man who was the KGB handler for a famous American businessman, Dr. Armand Hammer. And this was a secret that he had ever worked for the KGB when he was young, but I found that out. And I got a call in my hotel room in Moscow. Some guy speaking English with a Russian accent said, what are you doing in Moscow? And I said, I'm doing some investigative journalism. And he said, no, Moscow does not believe in investigative journalism. I suggest that you leave the country as soon as possible. And I thought to myself, I could get arrested here.
Yeah.
Done my job, I left. And it's something when you're dealing with an investigative story in Russia, they don't like it. So you've got to be careful. When it came to writing The Oligarch's Daughter, I had this long Moscow scene. And I thought about going to Moscow to do the research. And a friend of mine in the FBI did some research on his own and said, do not go to Moscow because you will probably get arrested.
Yeah.
And unlike that poor guy from the Wall Street Journal, I don't have the Wall Street Journal behind me to fight for me.
Yeah.
So I created the scene based on my own adventures in Moscow from years ago and
Yeah.
from talking to Russians who live there now. sort of make it feel as contemporary as possible. So I decided not to go to Moscow to do the research for Oligarch's Daughter, just out of prudence.
Yeah. So what's next then? I mean, you love to research, you're excellent at it. Russia has been a theme through your career, but what are you thinking of for the next adventure?
So my next book is the beginning of a series involving a couple of old spies, and it will involve Russia to some extent. Not quite as much as The Oligarch's Daughter, but it will involve Russia. And that's kind of the most I should say about it at this point.
Right. I will say before we go to questions from the audience, pre-Oligarch's Daughter, I'm a huge, huge fan of the Nick Heller series. And if, if he should happen to come back, my favorite Boston investigator, security consultant, whatever we want to call him, I would certainly vote for that. Just throwing that out there, Joe.
I will. We're negotiating right now for the TV rights for the Nick Heller series.
Oh, that's amazing. Great. That would be fun.
If that happens, then there will be publisher interest in writing another Nick Heller. Am I doing another?
Awesome. Can't wait. All right. So Robert, do we have questions from the audience here?
All right. I'm back, Lisa. We already have about a dozen questions, and folks, now's the time. If you have any questions for Joe or Lisa, let us know. So Paula says, I love the dual timeline in the story. They can be tricky to write, but yours seem effortless. How did you handle the transitions back and forth?
Oh, good question. I actually decided to write each timeline separately. I tried to alternate the writing between past and present and couldn't do it. So I wrote the past, then I wrote the present, and then I tried to figure out the engineering of this, how you could intercut the scenes and make each one relevant to the one after that. And that's what took some time, is to try to figure out how to do that. But once I figured out a method, we had the past and the present and the past and the present, where one had something to do with the other. It began to make sense, but it was not easy, I have to tell you, figure out how to put them together.
Well, that's fascinating to me, because I just did in the book that'll come out in August, Kiss Her Goodbye. Yeah, the same timeline, but to me, I don't know how I could have done them separately and brought them together. It's almost like I wrote a little bit and then realized, oh, now it's almost like time for a commercial break. Like now it's time for a scene from the past.
Yeah.
But for you, you had to do them separately and then weave them together.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. I hadn't done that before.
Yeah, Joe, before we get to the next question, I did want to read this. I think it has sentimental value to the person who wrote it. So Beverly says, I just wanted Mr. Finder to know that I'm representing his friend, the late Priscilla McMillan. She loved him very much, and I'm sure she's smiling. And so our next question, go ahead, Joe. I'm sorry.
No, I just want to say I love Priscilla McMillan, a wonderful woman and a Russian expert who was really important in my life.
Oh, that's awesome.
So a mysterious anonymous attendee asks, can you tell us a little bit about your writing routine? How many hours do you write, and when do you write in the day?
So I have an office across the street from where we live, and I come in here between 8 and 8:30 in the morning. And I normally work until around noon, take a break, do something else for a while, and then I go back to either editing the book, what I've written already, or researching tomorrow's scenes. I sort of feel like if I research tomorrow's scenes and I read the notes while I'm sleeping, I might solve a problem, a narrative problem of one way or another. So basically, I'll write for maybe 4 or 5 hours a day.
Gotcha.
And I feel that's pretty typical. I feel like that's what a lot of us do. We're morning writers, and then we do other things hoping that it will both help us see the problems with our writing that morning, but also inspire us for the next day. And
Yeah.
then it's possible Joe and I often text each other too. We don't know what we're doing. What's the next day scene? Tell me what to write. And yeah, you need friends in this business, definitely.
So Sharon has a two-part question. I think you touched on this a little bit, Joe, during the start of the conversation, but Sharon asks, would you classify this as a romantic thriller? And do you find it difficult to write female characters?
So is this a romantic thriller? I tell you what I was inspired by is Ken Follett's The Eye of the Needle. So it's a thriller with romance in it.
Yeah, it matters. It's a big driver of the plot.
Yeah, it's a big driver of the plot. I don't find it hard to write female characters. I have written assassins and murderers, and why not write a woman? I don't write women, I write people.
Yeah.
And but then again, once I've written the scenes, I sort of usually run them by my wife or my daughter to say, does this sound right to you? Would she really behave this way? I have to do my sort of testing to see if it's plausible to a woman reader.
And I love that. It's interesting to me because I think of a romantic thriller as being the romance is like the goal or the primary thing. And it's like this is a book where it's an aspect of the motivation and how the conflict came to be. I mean, it matters, but it's not the end all be all of the novel. I mean, Paul fell in love, and then unfortunately that brought him in line with some in-laws and some other aspects of his life, and also some ambitions and, kind of the person he thought he wanted to be, like, the big guy on town, that he also starts to realize, oh, well, now that I've dipped my toe in those waters, that's not actually who I am. So it's still very much his story. It's a discovery. It's a person's discovery.
Yeah, and the love story explains how he got there, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Bill has a comment joining us from Connecticut. He says the Oligarch Starter is one of the best books I've ever read.
Nice.
Wow.
Good job.
Thank you.
So Richard has a question. So he is 1/3 of the way through the book, but he does want to ask.
I can tell you how it ends.
No spoilers, Lisa. We're trying to go spoiler free. But he has a two-part question, and Joe, you can touch this one or not, whatever you want to do. He asks, are all Russian oligarchs mobsters? And what are your thoughts on how American and Russian oligarchs compare to one another?
This is fun stuff.
All right. Good questions, both of those. So all the Russian oligarchs came to their money because of who they knew. And they had to navigate a really difficult and scary system. So I won't say that they're not all mobsters, but they're all kind of paranoid about what could happen to them.
They're mobster adjacent?
They're mobster adjacent, yes, exactly.
Same skill set.
Right, yeah. After Putin took power, he called the richest men in Russia in and told them, if you want to hold on to your fortunes and your yachts and your mansions, stay in your lane. Stay out of politics. Do not get involved. And if you do that, you'll be okay. And then to sort of hammer home his point, Putin arrested the richest man in Russia, put him on trial, and sent him to the Gulag for 10 years. So the other oligarchs got the point right away. So are all the oligarchs mobsters? No, but they're a little nervous, and this brings me to the answer to your second question there. The American oligarchs, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and the others, exert a lot of power in the media and in the marketplace, and in politics. And they are more powerful in politics than the Russian oligarchs are, who stay out of politics if they want to stay alive.
Understood.
Well, and I'm kind of curious because isn't there this whole thing ever since the invasion of Ukraine where the Russian oligarchs keep turning up dead? And isn't that strikes me as just another Joe Finder novel right there?
They fall
This
out
kind
of
of one by one, they're all disappearing
Yep.
under mysterious natural causes.
Yeah, exactly. So that's that's why they've got to be really careful.
So Barbara in the chat has some sort of big picture questions for both of you. Barbara wants to know what is the favorite book? What is your favorite book that you've ever written? And then she also asks, at what age did you know you wanted to be a writer?
Okay, I'll start.
Good. You go. You got this, Joe.
What is my favorite of my books? You know, they say it's like choosing your favorite child, but I'll do that because I only have one. I actually don't know. I mean, it varies. Sometimes I like Killer Instinct the most.
I love that book.
Sometimes I like the book Paranoia a lot. And I'm really fond of this new one, The Oligarch's Daughter. So I'm kind of evading your answer there, frankly.
I feel like books are like favorite flavors of ice cream. We all like ice cream. It's the favorite flavors what you're in the mood for that day.
Yes.
So you can't say definitively like I only want vanilla because there's some days you want chocolate or strawberry or chocolate chip mint or whatever. But it's like the bottom line is we love ice cream. That's what matters. Books good. Books good.
Yes, good. I like that. And I decided I wanted to be a writer when I was, I think, around 10. As a kid, I had taken out a book from the library by a writer named Eleanor Cameron. And I loved this book so much, I wrote to the author, and she wrote back to me.
Aww.
And we had this ongoing pen pal relationship for years. I asked her all kinds of questions about how she wrote and where she came up with these ideas and that kind of thing. And it was my realization at that point that behind every novel is a person who makes a decision. This is a job you could have. And I thought, this is a job I would like to have. And my parents told me, no, you want to be a lawyer. And I decided, no, I wanted to be a writer. And it worked out okay, as it turned out. How about you, Lisa?
My story is similar. I grew up in Oregon, didn't know New York publishing, authors, editors, agents, anything, but loved to read. And then when I was 17, I actually wrote my first novel. Going into college, didn't know any better is actually how I put it. And I still swear by, there's certain things, and writing might be one of them, where it's best not to know any better. End up writing a complete novel. People said, what do you want to do with it? And I'm like, I don't know. So finally followed some guidance on how to get it published. And I mean, it wasn't for a lot of money at all. I think you start out in this business for love, not money. But after I published that first book and then the next and the next, started kind of realizing this is my passion. This is what I want to do. Because my family, like yours, they're all engineers and big corporate people. And it's like, yeah, writing is like a hobby. It's what you do in your free time. And at a certain point, I'm like, no, I want to do this for the rest of my life. And I tease them all now. My father's still deeply skeptical. He's like, really, seriously, this is your life making things up. I'm like, yeah, trust it. It's a good gig. I mean, if you can get it right, it really works. I mean, he still questions it, but it's worked out.
So Lisa and Joe, as we start to wind down, can we just reiterate what is next for both of you? Lisa, I know that Still See You Everywhere was just released, I think, in trade paperback.
Yeah.
And I know you have a big release coming out this summer. Could you talk briefly about that?
Yes. So I've been writing a series with the character Frankie Elkin, who's an everyday person who's obsessed with finding missing people the rest of the world's forgotten. Still See You Everywhere takes her to a remote atoll in the Pacific that I got to spend some time on. If you're terrified of coconut crabs, this is the book for you. And then in August, Kiss Her Goodbye is the new book, and she's in Tucson looking for a missing Afghan mom who survived Taliban takeover and refugee camps and made it all the way to Tucson with her 4-year-old daughter, and then disappears, and no one knows why.
And Lisa, you're one of the top, thriller and suspense writers in America. Folks can just Google you. But where else can folks learn more about you and your work? Are you on social media? Do you have a website, newsletter, etc.?
Pretty much anywhere you go. If you go Lisa Gardner BKS for Lisa Gardner Books, Facebook, Instagram, X, website. But yeah, and you will see Joe and I sometimes, talking about each other and books and stuff there too.
There we go. And Joe, now to you. What are we working on, Joe? We touched on it earlier, but what are we working on right now?
Working on the beginning of a new series, and you can find me on Facebook as under Joseph Finder, and Twitter and Instagram and Blue Sky and all that stuff, where I spend time when I'm trying to procrastinate, basically.
Yeah, we're good at that. Both of us are really good at
Very
that,
good.
aren't we, Joe? Yeah, we're excellent.
And Joe and Lisa, any last words before we wrap things up? Was there anything else you wanted to add before we end the session?
I want to thank Lisa for being here and for the conversation with me. Thank you so much, Lisa.
I think we both want to thank you and everyone who came out tonight. I mean, I have to say our job works because not just, in case you haven't noticed, authors are a little collegial and we love each other, but it's so great to get to communicate with readers and libraries and the opportunity. I so love that Zoom has made this so much more accessible for everyone. I mean, we're all book nerds, right? What can be better than in the end of the day to get to sit around in the comfort of our own home, possibly with hot fudge sundaes and or the dogs of our choice, and talk books. This is the dream. I'm happy we're all living it.
It's a good note to end on. So folks, let's give Joe and Lisa a big virtual round of applause for a great discussion. For those watching live, look for an email from me later today with a link to this recording, a link to Wellesley Books, and information about some other upcoming virtual programs. And again, for those watching live, please take the feedback survey. So thank you all so much, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their night. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Lisa.